Yes.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you everyone for making time to come to City Club on Labor Day week. Thanks all for being here. I'm Kate Walters, president of the Springfield City Club Board of Directors. And they were really excited to bring you a program that impacts lots of local families. We're going to be talking about childcare. And with us today, we have Holly Mar-Conter. She's the sector strategist at the Lane County Childcare. And we have Kristen Helton, she's the program coordinator at Quality Care Connections, which is based out of Lane Community College, and it's our local childcare resource and referral agency. And they've been working a lot of great stuff together. So I'll go ahead and turn it over now to Holly and Kristen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. Kristen and I are very excited to talk with you about childcare, the current status in Lane County and then specifically in Springfield, as well as some strategies we're working on to improve access to quality, affordable childcare. But before we get into sort of all of the details, we wanted to talk a little bit about just the childcare crisis in general. I think it's no secret that there is a crisis related to childcare across the nation, across the state, and here in our own community. We know that for families, there are limited options. So just in terms of the supply and families accessing childcare, it's a barrier. We are a childcare desert here in Lane County. Folks, raise your hands if you heard the term childcare desert. Like it's increasingly being used. What that means is there are 3 or more children for every available licensed regulated childcare spot. And Kristen will talk a little bit about what exactly that means when we say licensed, regulated, and all of the differences and nuances when we look at childcare across the board. Not only are we a childcare desert, but childcare, if you can find it, is very expensive. So the average cost of childcare here in Lane County is almost $900 per month per child. And there's a full spectrum of cost, again, tied to sort of the type of childcare. And then that's just for one child. If you have more than one child, you can imagine how those costs go up for families. Backing up just from the childcare desert note, we know that to start moving out of childcare desert status, when we look at the numbers of kids ages 0 to 5 primarily, and the number of childcare slots that are currently available, we know we need to add somewhere in the realm of 1,500 new childcare slots. So that's a great number to look at, and we also have to make sure for those new childcare slots that we have the qualified staff to work within those new slots, and that those new slots have to be affordable. Families have to be able to afford the childcare that we're developing as well. And so then the final piece, when we think about how the lack of childcare impacts families, we know that not all care is meeting families' needs, whether it's their linguistic, cultural, developmental needs, having an eye towards making sure families have a diverse array of childcare options available to them. It's a really critical piece of the puzzle. So that's for families. We know that the childcare crisis is also impacting employers significantly. We know that there are challenges related to recruitment, retention, hiring, productivity, absenteeism that are all directly related to childcare. And we know that that takes a toll not just on the employer, but it impacts their bottom line, it impacts morale. We were talking with an employer recently who, when we dig into their childcare issues for their company, it is an issue of overtime. Because when an employee doesn't have access to reliable childcare and they're out and they can't complete their duties, other colleagues are picking up those pieces of work and hitting overtime hours. So it's a whole, we start peeling it back. There are just many ways that the childcare crisis and lack of availability and affordability are impacting employers and employees. And then, you know, it also impacts the childcare workers in the field of childcare. It's generally relatively low pay. And if you've ever spent time with young children, it's really hard work. And often with less access to benefits, healthcare benefits, paid time off, retirement, etc. And then for childcare providers, people running programs and centers, it's challenging. The worker shortage that is impacting all sectors is pretty acutely impacting the childcare sector for all of the reasons we just mentioned, the wages, the intensity of the job, and the qualifications required. And then just for communities in general, when you put all of that together, the lack of access to affordable quality childcare is impacting communities at a pretty broad, far-reaching level. When we think about how it leads to the lack of workers, which leads to the lack of services in healthcare and education, sort of the whole spectrum across the community. And so I am going to turn it over to Kristen, who's going to talk a little bit more and give you a sense of sort of the big picture landscape of childcare from the state level down to what's going on here in Springfield specifically.
Thank you. I'll lower this a lot for myself. Thank you for having me. I am passionate about child care. It's the field that I started out actually for William Lane Parks and Recreation District as an activity leader in the after school program. If you're all are Springfield residents, I'm sure you're aware of those programs. And it really kind of brought me to where I am today to be super passionate about changing the landscape for both families who are seeking childcare and for the staff that work in childcare. But I wanted to kind of give you a big picture. Childcare in Oregon, as is in most states, is a complicated system of partners and state agencies that all work to support the industry. And the different types of childcare programs vary widely. And so I want to kind of just paint that picture. So the Department of Early Learning and Care is actually a new department in our state government that went into effect on July 1, just over a year ago. So it separated out the early learning from the Department of Education, K through 12, because they are vastly different and have vastly different needs. So within the Department of Early Learning and Care, there is the Child Care Licensing Division, and they do all the licensing and inspections and the safety oversight for licensed childcare programs. There are the Child Care Resource and Referral Agencies. We're also funded by the Department of Early Learning and Care through federal development block grants. We have early learning hubs, so each region in Oregon has an early learning hub, and ours is out at United Way. It's the early learning hub right now. And then we also have the employment-related daycare, which is both supported by the Department of Human Services for families that need subsidy to help cover the cost of childcare so that they can work or go to school. And then they also, it's now part of the Department of Early Learning and Care for programs to get listed to be ERDC and to be able to take families who have subsidy for childcare. So those are kind of some of the biggest pieces statewide. We have a lot of state and regional partners as well, most of who are funded through the Department of Early Learning and Care. Find Childcare Oregon is part of the 2-in-1 system. So families that are looking for care and get resources and referrals to programs that meet their needs. The Oregon Center for Career Development at Portland State provides all of the oversight for the professional development that childcare providers and workers are required to have. They have to have so many hours a year to be working in childcare. The Research Institute is kind of our home base. They oversee a lot of the different initiatives and programs that we work on with providers. And then Early Learning System Initiative, we call ELSI, is doing a lot of work on coaching, directly coaching childcare providers to improve practices. So a little bit more complicated than it. So there are many, many different types of childcare, and we typically look at them as being licensed or unlicensed. So licensed programs can be a childcare center. It can be family childcare, of which there
there's two types, registered or certified. And those will require a lot of steps to be able to become licensed. They require fire inspections and sanitation inspections and safety inspections. Require trainings, background checks, all the different things to be able to become a licensed childcare program. We also have recorded programs, and in Oregon, to be a recorded program, you can only have children in a preschool recorded program for no more than 4 hours a day. And they have to be between the ages of 3 and 5. And there's no licensing oversight for that. So typically, a lot of faith-based programs offer a preschool, and those are typically preschool recorded programs. School age recorded programs are often run by park and recreation districts. They're an after-school program at an elementary school, and those are also not licensed and there's no oversight. Then we have license exempt childcare in addition to the recorded programs, and that can be license exempt centers. So programs that are part of park and recreation districts or school districts, government-based organizations can run unlicensed care programs as well. And you can also be an unlicensed care provider in your home, provide care for 3 or fewer children. So I'm kind of curious if you guys have had your own children in a childcare program and what types this might be.
Family, so it was on-site after school, which was awesome, and then we did Montessori, and then also Lamb again for preschool.
Terrific. So a whole variety of different programs. Excellent.
Yeah, my son is at Dreamland, so one of Neverland Nursery, so I think that's the certified childcare
Center, yeah. Excellent. So you can see there's a lot of different types and a lot of different ways that my agency supports the different programs. So in Springfield, I wanted to just give you some data about what you have in Springfield. So there are currently 79 licensed programs in Springfield. 11 of those are certified childcare centers. We have 5 Head Start programs. Those are also required to be licensed. And there are 34 certified family childcare programs and 28 registered family programs. So registered family childcare is kind of an entry level family childcare. You can only have up to 10 children. And a certified family childcare, you have a lot more requirements, but you can have up to 16 based on the square footage of your space in your home. And there are 9 licensed exempt family childcare. So those are programs that are serving 3 or fewer children that are getting the ERDC subsidy payment. So a lot of time that's a grandparent or another relative or a neighbor who is providing care for a friend or a family member. And then there are 19 licensed exempt centers. And like I said, Willamette Lane is the bulk of those. And then the Springfield School District, which houses Preschool Promise, the early education programs. And then they also offer some preschool and preschool reported programs in school. And Preschool Promise. So that's what we have here in Springfield. And Carolina, just talk about Quality Care Connections and turn it over. So Quality Care Connections is the child care resource agency. We're part of a system across the country that has child care resource agencies. In Oregon, we have 15 offices. The one for Lane County is housed up at LCC. And we have 12 employees currently, and we are tasked with supporting over 400 child care programs in Lane County. And we do that through, we provide all of their training, we provide license navigation, we provide technical assistance, we do business classes, we do quality improvement supports, we go out to programs and we coach. We have an infant toddler specialist, we have an inclusion specialist. We're just in the process of hiring 2 social emotional coaches to work with programs who are experiencing kiddos with challenging behaviors. We have staff person who works just in our Spanish speaking community. It's about 20% of the providers in the county are Spanish speaking. And so, yeah, we provide a lot of different supports for the various types of programs. And I'll turn it back over to Holly.
So you can see why it's imperative that quality care connections is at the center of this work as we work on how do we better support providers, grow access to care, and just the depth of the detail and the data that we have available. When my position was developed as a sector strategist, almost 2 years next month will be 2 years ago. Housed at Onward Eugene, which is the economic development arm to the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, but it really was designed to look countywide at how do we leverage the work of quality care connections, the work of the early childhood hub, who are both funded by the state to do very specific work. How do we have a position that is leveraging their work and connecting with the broader community, business community, employers to identify what are some strategies that we can lift up and move forward collaboratively. So we're here to tell you a little bit about those. Before I get into that though too, wanted to mention just a couple of resources that are available statewide. One is the Child Care Infrastructure Fund, which is administered through Business Oregon. It's an incredibly exciting funding opportunity to increase the number of childcare facilities, essentially. It's the capital costs to build a new facility, renovate an existing space that's either currently being used for childcare or that could be used for childcare. So it's a great opportunity for communities, for employers, childcare providers, to be looking at how do we access those funds for our community to increase the facility space, which is another key piece of this. We're increasing the number of slots. Where are those going to be? And then there's also a $10 million investment that's looking at investing in on-site childcare at affordable housing development, which is another key piece of the puzzle we will talk about in a bit. Of, you know, as we're addressing our community's housing crisis, how do we also find ways to include childcare in that conversation? One just small note to make is that through our collaborative partnerships, we've been able to bring about $700,000 into our childcare system locally through some of the strategies we'll talk about, but looking at how we increase the number of registered, certified in-home providers, the number of centers, et cetera. And we are on track as we look at these strategies to add about 700-ish new slots between this year and into next year as well, which is chipping away at that 1,500 number of new slots. So a few emerging strategies. The first one is a media campaign that we launched this spring. Really is intended to highlight the importance of quality, affordable early learning and care, childcare, the role that childcare resource and referral agencies across the state play in that, and then opportunities in the field for people who may not have thought or considered a career in childcare or early learning, giving them the information so that they might make that leap and might choose that as a career path. So the website launched in April. There is a full social media component to it, and a communications plan that's really intended to get the word out and beyond the networks that Kristen and our shops are currently reaching. So we are really looking to how do chambers of commerce, how do workforce boards, how do industry groups get information out through new and different channels to people, again, who may not have considered a career in early learning. Oh, the other important piece to note there is as part of that, we're developing a statewide employer toolkit. So these exist in different regions, different pockets of the state across the nation. Our intent is to create one comprehensive toolkit for employers who are interested in developing, strengthening strategies to support their employees with regard to childcare. So this will launch in October at the Oregon Workforce Partnership Conference, and it will be a full resource kit and additional tools and information about how you might implement strategies to support your employees with childcare. Another emerging strategy that you may have heard of is the Early Childcare Business Accelerator. This is a model that started in Central Oregon and was designed really to provide people interested in starting a registered or certified in-home childcare business with all of the tools they need to make a sustainable business. So both bringing their passion for wanting to care for young kids and giving them all the information about how you would navigate all of the entities that Kristen mentioned and getting licensed, coupled up with how do you create a successful business model? What's your business plan? What's your budget? How do you manage employees? All of those really critical pieces that the Small Business Development Center steps in and provides. It's a partnership between childcare resource and referral agencies and small business development centers. We were fortunate to run a cohort in the winter of 2023 and just wrapped up a cohort in spring of this year. I do have some data. The winter 2023 cohort, being our first, we weren't exactly sure if anyone wanted to do this. When it went out on social media, we had over 60 applicants apply to Quality Care Connections to participate. Of those, we only had space for 20. And that was pushing it. Cohorts are typically 10 participants. Of that group, we had 14 graduate, which in this program, a 65-ish% graduation rate is what we were aiming for. We get 82% complete the course. Folks who go through and complete all of the course requirements, become licensed and open a childcare business are eligible for a $5,000 startup grant. That we are able to make through private grant funding and then through partnerships with the city of Eugene and very recently the city of Springfield, where those grants are made through small business grant programs. So we awarded $70,000 in grants. We know that 11 new jobs were created and about 100 new childcare slots were opened just from that first cohort. So we've run a second cohort. We learned that 20 might be too many. So we scaled it back to 10 per group, and we had 8 participants from across Lane County. 6 are on track to complete all of their course requirements, potentially all 8. We're just at the tail end, so we don't have all of the data in. But we anticipate about 75 new slots coming just from that cohort. At the end of this month, we're launching 2 cohorts. One will be at LCC's main campus. It's a Spanish-speaking cohort, so run by people whose native language is Spanish, all the materials are in Spanish. And then a cohort for rural community members. It will toggle between Florence and South Lane. So we're hopeful that this strategy is going to be sort of a core component of, again, how we continue to chip away at that 1,500 number of new slots that are needed in Lane County, as well as creating strong new businesses and jobs across the community. I don't know, Kristen and I said we were going to be kind of back and forth, and this is their being critical. And then we're also looking at employer childcare provider partnerships, sort of at a broad level as well. And this can look a lot of different ways we're finding. And there are 2 models. I think you mentioned the Lane, the program there. They have come forward as sort of the forefront of what a partnership might look like. So you all have probably heard that the University of Oregon invested funds in the expansion of the Lane's preschool program, which allowed for the expansion of 3 new classrooms. In return for the investment, U of O receives priority access to a number of those slots for their employees. And it's a really great model that we're interested in lifting up and getting others to sort of take note of. A great opportunity for employers to have access to funds for capital, to provide that for childcare providers who often don't have access to capital for any sorts of expansion. And then in return, providers are able to offer access to those expanded number of slots, which again, employers are.
I didn't understand that.
Employees. And then we do have, so that's one example where an employer could come in, provide the capital for an expansion or renovation for new slots. Another example is Lane County government is partnering with Tip Tap Grow, not on the capital funds, but on the operating funds. So their investment is helping to make sure that Tip Tap Grow can pay their employees a livable wage, and that they can retain those staff. in return for that investment, Wayne County government employees get access to a number of slots, at Tip Tap Grill. So lots of different ways that are emerging for employers to partner and invest in childcare that both benefit their employees, their bottom line, and the childcare programs, as well as community, because, it opens up new additional slots that are open to community members as well.
I can share one thing, yeah, so, one thing that we do know is that when programs are subsidized in part by another business, then the quality increases substantially because they can offset their costs. It's in, it depends on the partnership, but they can offset their costs for utilities or rent or building maintenance. And when those costs are offset, then you can pay your staff higher wage, and then they are more likely to stay. And we know that quality care, one of the components is highly retained workforce staff that stays and is well compensated. So they can get health insurance benefits, which right now is not very common for childcare workers. So if there are those employer-sponsored programs, then those are creating higher quality programs, which improves outcomes for kids.
And then a piece we touched on earlier was just looking at how do we address both the housing crisis and childcare crisis at the same time. And so there are models emerging too in our community that are pairing on-site childcare with affordable housing developments. So one is Ollie Court that just broke ground a month ago, at 13th and Chambers, the Homes for Good project, and a partnership with Head Start, Early Childhood Care of Wayne County, and Parkside Preschool, where they will be operating 6 brand new classrooms on the ground floor of, I think it's over 80 units of affordable housing. So increasingly a really exciting opportunity to be watching. Florence is not far behind. They have a development in the works called Elm Park that's about 30 units of affordable housing and would include an adjacent brand new early learning facility that would have 4 licensed classrooms, and that would be a partnership between Head Start, Early Childhood Cares, and a community provider, following sort of the similar model to Ollie Courts, and would essentially almost double the number of licensed regulated childcare slots in the Florence region, which is huge. And then Kristen, I'll touch on this, and there's more you want to check. So then there's a whole other body that Kristen just touched on, work looking at how do we raise wages in the field and look at total compensation packages, benefits, whether that's health benefits, paid time off, retirement, as a key piece or root cause of how do we address the workforce issues within the field. And so as part of that, we're looking at the development of a registered apprenticeship that would help get another pathway into the field, a paid career pathway into the field of early learning, as well as looking at how we better utilize tax credits and things that are available that we may not be utilizing to the full extent in our community, and childcare assistance. How do we make sure that people working in the field of childcare are not having to pay for their own childcare? So a lot of different pieces that are sort of emerging in that realm, but very much, I think there's a lot of acknowledgement that this is sort of a root cause of how do we get at some of the challenges that the sector faces. I don't know, Kristen, if there's more. And so how you can join the efforts. So we've shared a lot of information, probably more than you maybe ever wanted to know about childcare. But we do have some ideas on how the community and community leaders can get involved in the work. The first is definitely following, liking, sharing the Childcare Works for Oregon campaign and helping to get that information out to increase networks, more members of the community. Encouraging local businesses to consider and to sponsor childcare opportunities like the ones we mentioned, and they can look all different ways. And then supporting local initiatives that will help increase childcare capacity, quality, and funding, and then remove the barriers to program development and expansion. And there's probably a lot in that bullet that we can say that have to do with zoning and facilities and permitting and lots of things that we can do to work on locally to help sort of pave the way for more childcare in the community. Would you like to share?
We also talked a little bit about, initiatives that can support the professional development of childcare staff, because when they have greater knowledge and skills, that translates to better care for children and better outcomes. So, right now, the Oregon Promise Group provides free tuition at community colleges for, graduating high school seniors. We would like to see some funding being put towards free early childhood education degrees, because it's a low paying field. There's not a lot of huge interest in it, and the only way that we can increase childcare capacity is if we increase the workforce. And so we really need to make it easier for folks to be able to get their degree in ECD. So.
I think that wraps our presentation, but we're happy to take any questions.
I have a question. Thank you guys both. That was really informative, and I've seen parts of Holly's before, but it's always really insightful. In thinking about the benefits to an individual with a home-based business and the tax, there's a lot of tax incentives to having a home-based business. And I'm thinking about, during the pandemic, we had a lot of folks where there were two people working and then suddenly there was one person working. They were providing the childcare to their children, and a lot of people just chose to stay there. And I'm thinking, is there any kind of benefit or thought about a way to reach folks like that who could, in theory, consider opening up more of a business and welcoming other children into a small, home-based business? And I'm just wondering if there's like any kind of efforts on that front. To me, it sounds like a really good opportunity.
That is a big part of our mission for childcare resource and referral.
Yeah.
Is to recruit folks into the field and into the career of owning your own business and running your own childcare out of your home.
Yeah.
Recruitment efforts are a little bit tougher for us because we primarily work with people that are already doing childcare. And this is where Holly has brought such a tremendous amount of support to kind of help build the awareness and the understanding that you too can open a childcare program in your home. And for a lot of folks who want to be a stay-at-home parent, while their children are young, this is a very viable way to do that. And so supports on getting the word out is really important, and then send them to me. This is exactly what we do. We help people open childcare programs, and it's a big part of it.
Thank you. This is incredibly impressive. I have a question about the $55 million that's secured for infrastructure for building facilities. How, from your knowledge of how that works and you wanting to see some of that happen in Lake County, how would you recommend a community, or what would be the strategy behind accessing some of that? Like, what needs to be at the table? What things need to happen to produce something?
You can speak a little bit to that. So I think, so within that funding opportunity, there are several tiers, starting with planning grants for a community. It is sort of at the initial stages, or a provider, it gives the funding to do feasibility studies, site assessment, those sorts of things, all the way up to new construction on a brand new facility up to $2 million. So our strategy has been sort of supporting providers who are interested in expanding. So if they want to, if they need to apply for a clean grant, they need to apply for renovation funds, we're here to sort of be a support in those application processes, while at the same time working with partners like the folks in Florence who are poised to go after this funding. We're a support for how to get that application together and get it in, as well as brokering some conversations and public-private partnerships around how might we have some government partners, talking with employers, talking with childcare partners to put together collaborative, really durable proposals to put in. So I don't know if I'm answering your question all the way, but it's kind of multi-pronged in terms of how do we get support providers and then get as many applications in as we can.
So does the application need to come from the provider, or could it come from like, because I live in Junction City, by working with you, could I encourage City Council of Junction City to submit a proposal? So I can keep working in Eugene.
Yeah, and for that, for this specific grant, yes.
Like that.
Asking for.
Asking.
Hypothetically. There's a whole list of eligible applicants ranging from municipalities to providers themselves to nonprofits and school districts. So there's a whole list of who can be the applicants.
Great work you guys have been doing, and I have so many questions. I'll start with question about the employers. So I know you've been working with employers to help them understand how they could open up space for a childcare provider to rent out essentially and provide childcare to possibly their employees. It would be a great model. What I hear is very anecdotal just from employers I've talked to, so I'm curious if this reflects what you're also hearing from employers and how you address these concerns or issues. The first is employers who are interested in doing that and they find out that their space doesn't meet their required qualifications. Are there qualifications kind of under that regulatory umbrella? It's a very heavily regulated industry for a reason, but that you feel maybe a bit of an overreach or unnecessary that you are advocating for to be lessened, to expand. And then on the flip side of that, there's employers who are worried about, they're heavily regulated themselves and have very complicated insurance liability issues, and that's what they're most concerned about. How do you address that with folks?
I'll take the first part of your question, which, how do we support businesses that want to do this, but are hearing that it's really difficult because their facility doesn't meet the requirements? That is absolutely the case. But there are a lot of creative solutions. And so we were out talking to an employer just yesterday who would love to be able to provide childcare to their employees at a minimum. And they're thinking, wow, we could really do this big and offer spots to the community. But they have a room about the quarter size of this room to provide care. And we said, great, you'll need to start as an unlicensed program for fewer than 3 children. And then we're going to help you look at opportunities and apply for funding to be able to build a facility. So there's some creative solutions that we can help with. Another solution to that is it doesn't necessarily have to, employer-sponsored childcare doesn't have to be at their facility. They can rent a different facility. They can also partner with a childcare program that meets their kind of philosophy and needs of their employees, and then subsidize that program in exchange for spots in their childcare. And we did this for a business here in Eugene last year, and created a wonderful partnership between the business and a brand new center that was opening up. So they're helping to subsidize the program and their employees get some spots. So there's a lot of different ways to look at that. But one thing that I can do is I can come out to a business and talk about the space, literally look at the space and say, yeah, you could totally do this. Or you could definitely not do it, or I think we need to bring in a licensor to take a look. So there's options, and we could talk about this. We do that regularly.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Do you have any national data around retention of employees that shows kind of the ROI for companies investing in either subsidizing or providing childcare for employees?
Oh, we can find that out. Yes.
I can find you the specific data, and then what I can say without giving you the actual numbers is the retention goes up, you're more likely, and employees are increasingly expecting some sort of childcare benefit as they're considering job options as well. So it's a competitive edge piece for employers, and then a retention tool too. And I will say too, just to add on to Kristen's, to your question, we're finding that partnerships between employers is also a powerful strategy, because an employer today, the folks, excuse me, that the employer we talked with yesterday, they have several employees with babies today. But in a year, 2 years, they're gonna have several employees with toddlers and then preschoolers, and so the needs are constantly changing. And so looking at how you can get groups of employers together to share spots in a facility that may not be on any of their premises, is a durable strategy so that it can wax and wane and they can adjust to what their needs are. The last thing we want is for employers to have a bunch of on-site childcare that then closes because their needs go up and down, and so that can be a challenge as well.
I was struck by the wide variety of different types of licensed, unlicensed. Is there some logic behind having, one, so many different categories, and two, between having licensed and unlicensed facilities? Can some of that be simplified?
Yeah, one of the most important things in childcare is parent choice. And parents want a variety of different type of childcare to meet their needs. So for some folks, that is a licensed center where there is one teacher for every 4 infants, and you have to do diaper changes every 2 hours, and it's, there's cameras, and it's very much, I don't like to use the term institutional because there are many centers that are not institutional in that way, but it feels more like there's a lot of structure to it and a lot of oversight. Other folks want a family friend to provide safe quality childcare, but they can't afford to pay it. So if they're they meet the income requirements, they can do the ERDC care and have their best friend watch their kid, and then the best friend gets paid through the state to do it. Or you want kind of a grandma family home where there's just 7 or 8 kids and it looks like a home, not a childcare center, right? But it still provides the curriculum, the guidance for social emotional development, the early literacy that you want, that you might not get at the neighbor's house who's providing the ERDC care. So it really supports the parents' need for choice and have different levels of care. There's no way the state or any of the states could provide licensing for kind of the mom and pop type of childcare, the fewer kids. But the bigger the program gets, the more licensing requirements and oversight there is. So it just provides options.
So I have a question, Molly, regarding all this. I appreciate all these efforts and liking and slots opening up, but my concern is the trend going forward and others are making a net gain. These are all small businesses, and the survivability of small businesses is very good. And I know you talked about some in there, but I'm just concerned is, so what do we have in place, or should we put in place? Given the struggle that all businesses have, certainly small businesses, there's cost changing that so that they survive. So that we keep adding slots versus maybe holding steady.
I'm so glad you asked that question, Rob Lively. Something keeps me up at night. I mean, we have to, as we're adding slots, we have to make sure we're not losing the same number of slots on the back end, otherwise it's like, yeah. I think there's a couple pieces to that. I think for people who go through programs like the Early Childcare Business Accelerator, they're getting ongoing support from Quality Care Connections and the SBDC to make sure that they aren't one of those programs that opens and closes. I think there is some natural, and you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but just sort of churn as people open childcare businesses when their children are small, then their children start school, and those programs tend to sometimes be closer to first.
So there's some accounting for that. And then there's just the bigger picture. How do we make sure that Quality Care Connections is strong and has the capacity and support that they need to support the providers? And we make sure the hub is strong and that they have the support and the capacity they need to supporting the whole system. And same with regard to, the programs of small businesses. So I think it's complicated. I think it's, how do we make sure there's enough capacity to support each of them? And then, making sure we have great data to be looking at to understand how many programs are closing, how many slots are we losing, and how does that impact? So moving forward, there's more.
Yeah, well, we also wanna, collect and assess data on why our programs closing. And what we know, and we've already mentioned this, is low wages, underappreciated, little to no compensation. And frankly, childcare is a high stress environment. You are on eight for your full shift, right? You don't get to take a break, walk down the street and get a cup of coffee. You have to stay there and watch the kids, right? We have that all day. And
We exactly requested.
exactly. But there is a huge focus right now on provider well-being. And I was in a meeting this morning with Delk, and it's really, how do we make sure that providers' needs are met, whether that's an early educator in a center or a family childcare provider. So looking at increasing those wages, and I can say one fabulous thing that came out of the pandemic, I don't think anyone's ever put those words together, fabulous and pandemic, is that childcare wages went up about $5 an hour in 5 years. I think part of that was due to the Oregon minimum wage increases, but it was also due to that childcare was really getting recognized as an essential need and an integral part of the local economy. And so there were so many, about half of the childcare programs closed during the pandemic, and only about half of those reopened. And so I think I haven't looked at the data lately, but I think we're getting back up to pre-pandemic numbers. We really have to figure out, how do we get these programs to stay open? And those are benefits. I surveyed programs in Lane County and discovered only half do health insurance. Pretty much, I think it was 20% do some kind of retirement plan, but it's a 403B with no employer match. So is it really a benefit? And so there's so many different things that we can do. We just signed up, and got Canopy, who provides an employee assistance program, and 7 centers have signed up so that their employees can have counseling and therapy, which programs don't get that. If they don't have health insurance, they're not getting that free counseling and therapy. And so I guess that's the answer to your question, is why are providers closing? Why are early educators leaving the field? And a lot of it comes down to their well-being. It's a hard job and it's underpaid. Well, it's a little intense, but I've been there, so I certainly.
So I should know this, but we talk about a child care business, anybody can, and then you ask the question, there's such a range from a licensed, unlicensed, so I'm trying to understand, how do we know? So what's that end thing, given the wide range and the choices families make about it? So how do we know what that figure is that we need to try to achieve, given all the choices out there?
I want to clarify too, childcare desert also peels apart the different ages, and we are definitely a childcare desert for infant and toddler. There is no amount of an increase that is going to meet the demand for infant toddler. Preschool age childcare is kind of fluctuates. Right now, we have Head Start, we have Preschool Promise, so there are some needs being met by those programs. However, they are often not providing all-day care, odd-hour care, rotating schedules, for families that are working for the hospital and they work is it 3 days on, 4 days off? No program wants to do that. It doesn't work. And so there has to be some supports that go into meeting what the parents are looking for. Lost my train of thought there, but I do wanna, you had another question about the liability for employers, so I wanna make sure we answer that. So, did we answer your questions? You wanna talk about the liabilities? You know? I can talk a little bit about that. I can't talk about the liability on a business that's not already childcare, but I can talk about, yes, there is a high liability with providing childcare, and absolutely having liability insurance is very important, and mandatory in some cases. We are hearing a lot from programs that insurance rates are going up hugely for childcare programs and not being affordable for programs. And so that definitely needs to be addressed, and it has been looked at nationally, but it still needs to be addressed. And so we have some resources. We can refer folks to some opportunities for liability insurance. There's a broker in town who's just does childcare. And has been doing it for over 30 years. So started out in Springfield. I'm not sure they're still in Springfield, but it's Will Hyde and Associates. So there's some options out there. We can get you these resources.
So, and I guess what I was referring to is more if there's a manufacturing company, right? I mean, they've got 200 employees and shift work, and that's who we need to be targeting for childcare, providing childcare spots for those folks. But who does the liability fall on if they're just renting out the space on site? How does that impact their insurance liability? And if they're just renting out to somebody, then does that fall under the childcare provider?
It really depends on the business structure that they set up. So it could be a lease arrangement for $1 a year to use the facility, but the business is privately owned by the childcare. I think that's probably the model to go towards. But I think there's a variety of different models. I wouldn't know enough about that.
I think I would just add that usually when we have these conversations, we, as Kristen just mentioned, we encourage bring a childcare operator in if you have the space, make that space available. Most employers are not in the business of childcare, so running their own childcare doesn't usually make sense. And then there's the great option of the on-site or near-site childcare. It doesn't make sense for an employer, just driving home. There are all kinds of options to support employees with childcare. It could be a stipend or a voucher, you know, where they're helping to offset the cost of either regular childcare or emergency backup childcare. And it gives the employee or family the flexibility to find a provider that works for them, their family, their schedule, their needs. So that's another great option in addition to many others.
An example of that, we had a funding from Peace Health probably 10 or 15 years ago to provide a network of childcare providers that met the needs of hospital workers. And the Peace Health paid us to manage this network. And then the hospital referred their staff to the different programs that were in the network. And the network programs had to provide odd hour and rotating care. But then they got funding also from Peace Health to offset the costs that they were providing for that odd hour unusual care. So that's another example of a great partnership. We would love to do that again with Peace Health or any other business.
I think going back to one of Rep. Lively's questions around the childcare desert piece, just want to underscore that that number is calculated based on licensed regulated slots. It's not taking into account any license exempt care. So there's something there to better understand, especially as many families, we know are cobbling care together in all kinds of ways. And then that, I think, ties to Tiffany's question of how do you identify the people who may have left the workforce and are maybe caring for their kids, maybe they're picking other kids up after school. that's a big piece of the strategy is how do we make them aware of opportunities to get paid through the employment related daycare program, through the state for people who are eligible. Those, you know, the parents or the neighbors picking a kid up or watching kids during the day may be able to get paid through the state. And then how do you set them on sort of a trajectory of maybe they want to become a registered in-home childcare and care for a few more kids, and then maybe they want to become certified, you know, there's sort of a trajectory that people could be put on.
One last question, because we're coming up on the hour. For me at least, I don't have anymore, but this came up a lot when we were doing our Leadership Eugene Springfield interviews, and I've experienced it myself too, but as a like community talent retention strategy to ensure that we are a community that supports young families and young professionals with kids, and being in the workplace, after school care and kind of alternative care options is something that we just don't have access to here. And I know for myself, you know, I have to pick my kid up at 5:15. So how much does your work overlap with that kind of piece of the childcare puzzle? Or is that like a phase 2? We're working on infant toddler care right now.
So it's definitely a part of Holly's work, for sure. If a program is looking to expand to add school age care, they need some funding sources, they need some leverage. Holly can work with them. They're simply a part of the childcare system. Quality Care Connections can support programs that want to offer school age care as well. Our recommendation typically would be a recorded school age program. It's a little tricky. You can't always get the ERDC subsidy if you're a recorded school age program. But there's also a new licensing type for just school age care, and that just went into effect, I think, on January 1. And so we're still kind of navigating that. I don't know that we've had any programs specifically do that yet, but it's a different set of requirements because school agers are very different than infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. So that is a new option that's out there. As is, there's a brand new option for micro centers, which they are like a licensed childcare center, but they get an exception to operate on a really small scale. And then they don't have to meet all of the requirements that a large center does. I think Representative Lively, you were out there. Yes, at Mandy Johnson's program. And so Mandy's kind of one of the pilot programs for this, but it's exciting because it's a new way to run a childcare if you don't want to do it in your home, but you don't want to open up a huge center. So, so there's a lot of work in the state to help recruit, retain, and build options for families and providers.
Thank you guys so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm gonna leave a stack of my Christmas cards.
Yes, thank you. And our next program is going to be September 19th, and you guys can check your emails for more information, but we are working on pulling together a program around the Lane County Charter amendments that are going to be on your ballot this election. So hopefully see you guys in a couple weeks.
Yes. Yeah, but I know when they.
I don't see that's the only manufacturer that I got. We're gonna take a.